If you want like random psych books, they're just lying right over here. Okay, but anyway, we're doing, like I said, Observers and Narrators in Film Fiction by Enrico Torre in the Croatian Journal of Philosophy. As always, ask questions if you want. Alright, introduction. The philosophical debate on the audience's engagement with fiction films focuses on two theses, namely the imagined observer thesis, IOT, and the film narrator thesis, FNT. Philosophers such as, now I'm talking about psych, I'm thinking of these as like, the psychological classifications like INTJ or whatever. But yeah. Philosophers such as George Wilson, Gerald Levinson, Gregory Curie, and Boris Gout consider these crucial to understand the particular experiential and cognitive response that fiction films are meant to elicit from their audience. The two theses can be expressed as follows. IOT. Viewers of fiction films are meant to imagine being observers of fictional events. FNT. Viewers of fiction films are meant to imagine that fictional events are told by a narrator. Alright, so one of these, this is interesting. So one of them is like in the world. You're meant to imagine being observers of fictional events. So you're like observing a world. And the other one is that you're being told a story from someone else's perspective. That's so you are looking at it versus the narrator is telling you. So it's either you're seeing it as a fiction or you're seeing something through someone else's eyes. Author's raw intuition is that the two theses are incompatible and that IOT is true while FNT is false. I mean, this is an empirical question, what people are thinking when they're talking about film. When I ask my students to express their intuitions on these theses before sharing mine with them, their answers tend to converge with mine. Although that is surely not a proper piece of experimental philosophy, such convergence of intuitions seems to suggest that when one reflects on one's experiences as a viewer of fiction films, one has the impression of having enjoyed a perceptual experience of fictional events, but not the impression that those events were told by a narrator. Indeed, we might add, one does not have the latter impression precisely because one does not have the former. Because one does have the former, Since the film viewer imagines seeing fictional events, she does not need a film narrator who would tell those events to her, just as she does not need a real-life narrator who would tell her what she sees in everyday life. Yes and no. Because it's like the placebo effect when you go to the doctor. Like the whole experience of going to watch a movie or watch something does have an effect. And so it may not be a narrator, but you do get yourself into the movie watching mode, which you do not have in like real life. In real life, you just go do stuff. You don't have the experience of like going to the theater or sitting down in front of your TV to watch things. And so there is definitely something there. There is a setup there. Now, you have to know that what you're doing is fiction, but like, is that a narrator or is that something else? I don't know, but like, there's definitely more to it. Okay. Author says, however, in the philosophical debate, things go differently. On the one hand, philosophers such as Wilson and Levinson argue that IOT and FNT are both true. On the other hand, philosophers such as Curie and Gout argue that the two theses are both false. Despite disagreeing on what is true and what is false, philosophers seem to agree on rejecting the intuition that if IOT is true, then FNT should be false. Indeed, in the philosophical debate, the IOT and FNT are so intertwined that they are sometimes criticized or defended as if they were one, as if they had to stand or fall together. A notable exception is Mario Slugin, who disentangles IOT from FNT, though he expresses skepticism about both theses. Cinesemiac says, I think the mindset thing is technically called an attitude or posture. Okay, see, I don't know enough about this. You Warhammer, hey Retheus, how you doing? Thank you for the subscription. My alerts are busted. But you Warhammered too hard today. Yeah, I know people Warhammer very, very hard. I hope you're doing well. Yeah, we're reading something about what it is to view a fiction, like a fictional movie or something. Yeah. So, Warhammer, yeah. Okie doke. In this paper, I would like to explore the logical connection between the two theses rather than arguing for or against them. I will neither defend nor reject IoT, but I will investigate whether endorsing IoT involves also endorsing FNT, as philosophers seem to think, or instead involves rejecting FNT, as the above-mentioned institutions suggest. I will argue for a middle ground. Endorsing IoT does not involve rejecting FNT, unlike what intuition suggests, but the connection between IoT and FNT is less tight than what philosophers have so far assumed. When one endorses IoT, both the endorsement and the rejection of an FNT are available theoretical options. However, I will argue the endorsement of FNT is a preferable option because it offers a more compelling explanation of our engagement with and appreciation of fiction films. Okay, and just so everyone remembers, IoT is viewers of fiction films are meant to imagine being observers of fictional events. And so I don't know what observing fictional events, that's imagined observing fictional events, and FNT means it's being told to you by a narrator that like they have viewed this and then it's somehow being translated to you by a narrator. Okay, the imagined observer thesis. The theoretical background of IoT is a conception of fiction as prescription to imagine. This background is shared by both the philosophers who defend IoT and those who reject it. Thus, the discussion about IoT is a controversy on whether the imaginative project that the film viewer is meant to implement involves not only imaginings about fictional characters and events, but also imaginings about the viewer herself. In sum, according to IoT, the viewer imagines not only that fictional characters exist and fictional events occur, but also that in the fiction she observes them. Yeah, okay. So this is actually really difficult. This comes up all the time in other areas, because when you're talking about math, actually, when you're talking about logic, you have to sort of imagine numbers and stuff, and we can't always guarantee that these things exist. Like you could have like, a contradictory set or a paradoxical set. And so the idea that you're talking about them, in what state are you imagining something that may or may not be logically inconsistent? So just because it's a fiction doesn't mean that just because we're talking about film fiction, this is actually a bigger discussion. So when you imagine something that may not exist in philosophy, what exactly are you doing? Are you having an imagined experience about something, or is it something else? So this is why fiction actually gets, it has long legs in terms of philosophy. Author says, all this helps us to explain why the intuition in favor of IoT might be misleading. IoT does not limit itself to claiming that the viewer has the impression of perceiving fictional events. If the intuition in favor of IoT relied only on that impression, what the intuition suggests could not settle the philosophical debate on IoT. Yeah, so it's not that you're just getting impressions of these things, it's that these things all occur in the fiction, but then that you are also observing them within that fiction. So you're there, which is an interesting claim. You are part of that fiction at that point. You're putting yourself there imaginatively. What IoT claims is rather that the impression of perceiving fictional events is included into the imaginative project, whereby the viewer is meant to enjoy the film as a fiction. The defender of IoT might insist that the viewer's impression of perceiving fictional events supports the truth of the thesis, assuming that the viewer is inclined to import this impression into her imaginative project. Yet the critics of IoT precisely deny the latter assumption. Yeah, I mean, you have to think, what are you observing? You have to sort of imagine that you were observing something, even though it's a fiction. And so it's like you have to put that into your head. And it doesn't matter for film. It matters like in any fiction. Like if you're reading a fictional story, you're still perceiving that in some way, that like you're being described. You're still like thinking of these things as being part of like the fictional reality. The debate involves both a normative and a descriptive reading of IoT. According to the normative reading, IoT specifies what film viewers should do in the framework of fiction as a cultural practice. However, what a cultural practice such as fiction prescribes is not something that one might find in written laws or user manuals. Rather, the normativity of cultural practices lies in attitudes and habits of practitioners. Therefore, individuating the norms that govern a certain practice involves providing a correct description of it, which might highlight not only features of it which the practitioners are aware of, but also tacit assumptions that remain implicit in it. In this sense, IoT, just as FNT, as we shall see, has not only a normative component, but also a descriptive component. It is a thesis on what the ideal viewer should do based on what actual viewers have done and keep doing. IoT thus concerns the viewer's rules of engagement, as it were, but these rules are grounded in actual practices. All right, so we got a typo here. Yeah, so I mean, the point is here, basically, look, what are you supposed to be doing when you go to the movies? Like, you don't actually think you're watching a documentary. So it's like, but like, that is the thing. Like, you could go to the movies and watch a documentary. And in fact, that's how people used to get their news back in the day, was you'd go to the movies, you'd watch a movie, but they'd also have, like, you know, news clips. So to clarify the controversy on IoT, let me consider an example. In the opening scene of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, the viewer sees the hero, Scotty, slipping off a roof. Both the defenders and the critics of IoT agree that the viewer is meant to imagine that Scotty slips off a roof. In other words, it is fictional. It is true in the fiction that Scotty slips off a roof. The controversy is whether the viewer is also meant to imagine that she herself, as a fictional observer, sees Scotty slipping off a roof. Is her perceptual experience of Scotty's slipping fictional in the same sense in which that slipping is so? All right, so if you were in, so this is the hard question. What is the sense of real when you are in a fictional world? Because if you were in that fictional world and you see someone falling, you should go get help, basically, because that person will need medical attention. But if it's a fictional world, you can't really change it because it's not your world. But then are you really there? What are you imagining at that point? Because you're not actually there then, because otherwise you would have to go, you know, not be a crappy human and help the person that fell. At this point, intuitions seem to go against IoT. If a viewer of Vertigo should tell the story of Scotty, she would hardly mention her presence as an observer when Scotty slipped off the roof. Her perceptual experience of that event does not seem to belong to the fictional world in which the event occurs. Curry relies also on this intuition to argue that IoT is false. Yet the defender of IoT is not committed to the claim that the viewer as an imagined observer belongs to the same fictional world to which fictional events like Scotty's slipping belong. Slugan interprets Wilson's epistemology of film as committed to that claim, but as we shall see, Wilson's thesis can be also interpreted in a way that avoids that commitment. According to Kendall Walton, each fiction involves two fictional worlds, which he calls the story world and the game world. The former is the world in which fictional events occur, while the latter is the world in which the viewer, as a fictional observer, can perceive those events. Scotty's slipping occurs in both worlds, but the imagined world sees it only in the game world, not in the story world. That's interesting, because now we're talking more like video game language. Like, when you're playing a video game, like, are you feeling bad for some of the characters? Yes, you might feel bad for some of the characters, but you can only interact with them in terms of, like, the game interactions. It's not like you can go call an ambulance in, like, you know, Zelda or whatever when someone gets hurt. So, like, there's a story world, and then there's the game world, which is basically your interactional abilities within that world. And so in, like, film, of course, you have very limited stuff, but in, like, a video game, and you can see this is a 1990 paper, and maybe it got also 2015. So that's interesting, because in 1990 there were already video games, and you could imagine that you were in the video game, even back in the 90s, of course, or in the 80s, whenever that was written, but, like, you were limited in what you could actually do. We might say that the game world is constituted by the story world plus a further ontological region, which is a sort of observatory on the story world. From there, one can observe a world to which one does not belong. Stefano Predelli calls such a region the periphery of the story world. The imagined observer figuring in IoT is a denizen of the periphery, whom I will name the observer. In some, the film viewer located in the actual world is meant to imagine seeing events that occur in the story world by playing the role of the observer in the periphery of the latter world. So I guess that's what it is to, like, sit yourself down and watch work of like fiction, is to get yourself into this observer mode of a fictional story. The controversy on IoT does not concern whether the observer belongs to the story world, but rather whether we really need to posit the observer, the periphery, and the game world to explain our engagement with fiction films. Although the defenders and the critics of IoT may agree that the observer does not belong to the story world, the disagreement remains on whether the story world is all that the viewer is meant to imagine, or she is meant to also imagine a periphery and to locate herself there as the observer. If we want to afford a compelling explanation of our engagement with fiction films, do we really need the periphery and observer as its inhabitant? This is, I contend, the best way of casting the controversy on IoT as a genuine philosophical debate. Moreover, this approach also enables us to properly characterize the debate on FNT, as I will show next. All right, let me think about this for a half second, because, like I said, I don't deal with film. Like, I'm not a film person here. I deal with, like, metaphysics of logical contradiction sometimes. Like, that's more, sadly, like, that I've mostly talked about fiction stuff like this with respect to, fictional entities and, like, impossible objects, like, contradictory things, or like Santa, like made up or unicorns, things that are fictional entities that we just make up. Like, do they exist? And so the question is, when we're talking about that, do we have to postulate some sort of third world where the unicorn is in, like, the fictional world, then there's the real world with us, and then when you're, like, talking about fiction, do you get yourself into, like, some sort of, like, special observatory position where you're looking at a different world? You've got a trans-world relation there where that you give yourself access to a fictional imagined world. Maybe that's exactly what imagination means, is to give yourself an in-between position where the current world branches off into a possible world where these things do exist. So, like, the real world's over here, but you're looking at as if the real world could change into a fictional world with these fictional things in it, and you're sort of deciding which way you're going. Even though one's impossible, you can sort of still look in that direction. And of course, you don't know. This is one of the fun things about fiction and, like, postulating the future. You don't know. Maybe the world will just get really weird all of a sudden, and, like, it will just all of a sudden we'll have, like, monsters and aliens and unicorns and Santa Claus and all that stuff. Yeah, compared to the thought experiment. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right, semiotics. That's generally when we're doing thought experiments, these are meant to be real world possible, but of course many of them are not. So that's exactly right. But, like, this is why, like, exactly in thought experiments, and, like, this is where I've dealt with this. I have not dealt with enough of the philosophy of literature or philosophy of film. Okay, the film narrator thesis. I guess if I had to guess, like, let's just say, just from what we've been saying, when you're reading a fiction book, that's probably where this comes out of, because then you're reading a fiction book. There's more clearly a narrator aspect when you're reading a fiction book. But let's see, when it comes to film, what are we doing? The film narrator thesis: narrators are fictional agents, possibly fictional counterparts of actual authors, who are meant to supply information about fictional events. Some fictional films have explicit narrators. For example, in Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, the story is told by the voiceover of an omniscient narrator played by the actor Michael Horton. Explicit narrators like that are not controversial. In fact, FNT states more than this. According to FNT, narrators play a role also in films such as for Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita, that do not exploit voiceovers or analogous stylistic devices to indicate explicit narrators. Such implicit narrators are controversial. Defenders of FNT argue that implicit narrators play a key role in our engagement with fiction films. Critics of FNT, on the other hand, argue that implicit narrators are just cumbersome philosophical speculations that play no interesting explanatory role as regard film experience. I knew you'd get all happy when Kubrick got mentioned. the question is like, clearly there's things that you're doing with the cameras, like you zoom in, you pan left, you like whatever it is. That in some sense is controlling what you're looking at. Now, is that an aspect of the narration? Or are you going to call that like a part of the narration? Because like that's the, of course, it's not like the viewer of a film has control over what to look at any given point. So it's not like they're in an imagined world where they are able to look around. It's completely controlled. And so it's like, I guess you could start to make an argument that there is some sort of narration, but again, implicit. And how exactly do you bring that out? It's like this whole like little scene, it looks pretty simple, but like it is thought out right here. What you guys are looking at is like just like my head on like this box, but like that in itself also has you know, it does something about what you're looking at in terms of stream. And like I did think about this a bit when I set this scene up. Okay. The debate on implicit narrators also concerns literary fictions that lack an explicit narrator endowed with a recognizable psychological profile. There is, however, a rationale for positing implicit narrators in literature that does not apply to the case of film. Although novels are made of sentences that authors have written as prescriptions to imagine, a reader who engages imaginatively with a novel is rather inclined to cast those sentences as assertions that describe fictional events. Oh, that's false. Every frame a Rembrandt. Okay. Manuel Garcia Carpintero calls this a first phenomenological motivation for covert narrators, stressing that it intuitively seems that the contents of third-person narratives are reported to us. Well, you have lots of choices on how to see and what to see in a shot. Yes, but it's not like you can reframe it as a viewer. You can imagine it, I guess, but like you have to always start with what's given to you. At least you know this better, it's true. Like, of course, you can think about the shots differently, but you still have to start off from what's given. So, yeah, you got a point there, though. I should think more on that. This phenomenology of reading bears upon the reader's imaginative project in such a way that in this project the subject who utters the sentences cannot be the real writer, who indeed makes the prescriptions rather than assertions. The reader is thus led to imagine the narrator, that is, the fictional subject, possibly the fictional counterpart of the real writer, who makes those assertions. Ultimately, the same sentences are assertions of the narrator when considered from within the imaginative project, and prescriptions of the writer when considered from without the project. Again, so this is what I was talking about before. It's like, well, if it's a work of fiction, who's telling you the story? And, you know, just because it was written by someone, that doesn't mean the person who was describing the thing's honest, even if there is no one specifically named within the story, like that there is a narrator. If you don't name one, that still doesn't mean they're honest or accurate in their descriptions of that world. In literary fiction, both an explicit narrator such as Barry Lyndon in William Thackeray's The Luck of Barry Lyndon, and an alleged implicit narrator like that of Gustave Flaubert's L'Education Sentimentale make linguistic assertions about the fictional world. Yet when it comes to films, things are quite different. The omniscient explicit narrator who replaces Barry Lyndon in Stanley Kubrick's film adaptation of Thackeray's novel also makes linguistic assertions which describe the fictional world, but the alleged implicit narrator who would describe the fictional world of Fellini's La Dolce Vita surely is not making linguistic assertions. Otherwise, there would be something like a voiceover to I've not read this word, vehiculate them. A voiceover to vehiculate them, but nothing like that can be heard in that film. Yeah, I mean, if there's going to be specific assertions, you need a narrator to do that. Or, you know, even like you're talking silent film, you can have like when you have like those text on screen, is that like a narration? What is that? It's a narrator from nowhere. But again, you're still seeing like the text on the screen. You could see that as like a narrator, but if it wasn't there, what is there still something that can be called a narration? All this seems to motivate the intuition that F&T is false. A narrator is a fictional agent who makes linguistic assertions to describe the fictional world. There is no narrator in fiction films in which there is no voice asserting anything. Yet the defenders of FNT have a way of addressing this issue. They can argue that the implicit film narrator does not make linguistic assertions, but rather pictorial assertions, that is, assertions that have pictures instead of words as their vehicle. Yeah, I mean, this is what I was saying. Like, you're giving someone a shot at a given different points. So this is what I was thinking. So you're making a shot, and the shot has a point, and maybe it's more or less clear what the assertion is in the shot. But then again, when I'm saying things, it's more or less clear what I mean sometimes, but not all the time. So it's like maybe certain pictures are more obvious what they mean and then others, but like that's normal. The rationale for the implicit narrator in film from this perspective resembles that for the implicit narrator in literature. Filmmakers use pictures to prescribe imaginings, but when the viewer engages with her imaginative project, she is inclined to cast these pictures as pictorial assertions on the fictional world rather than as pictorial prescriptions, thereby attributing them to the implicit film narrator instead of to the filmmaker. Yeah, so you could say basically whoever, you're not really talking about Spielberg or Stanley Kubrick as the person that's, doing it, but like somehow there's someone there that is showing you certain things in a certain way. And that makes some sense. Like I was thinking, The Shining in terms of Kubrick. That's like, you don't actually think Stanley's there taking the picture. Like that's never how I ever thought of, now that I think about it, I never think of it as like, do I think the director or whatever is standing, or the producer, whoever does this stuff, I don't even know, is standing there with the camera? No, that's not how I think about it. It's somehow someone else is taking those shots. If that's how do I even think about that? I don't know. Like, who is actually there with the camera? Okay. Still, this argument, Kubrick, he was very hands-on, wasn't he? Well, Cinesemiacs will have to answer that for you. I don't know much about stuff, but like I still don't think of Stanley Kubrick as being in the room with like the characters in The Shining. Like I don't think of any of like the the movie staff who had to be there. It'd be kind of ruin the movie if I thought about them being there. But it is like there is someone like there's a reason, like in some sense, why the angles are the way they are. Like who filmed it from that angle. So. Cinesemiacs says 90% of the movie is made in the editing room. Yeah, I mean, that's a good quote. Yeah, what's the quote from baseball? 90% of the game is 50% mental. Or 50% of the game is 90% mental. Yeah. Yeah, so Kubrick probably was, but Cinesemiacs is saying that he was the exception. Okay. Okay, so there's some weird implicit film narrator that is controlling the editor. Yeah. Like in the editing process, or like, how the shots are viewed. Since Semiak says he had full control over all his films and stuck his hands in every aspect of marketing into sound design. Wow. That's excessive, but maybe it was good, I guess. Okay. Still, this argument in favor of FNT seems to be in tension with IoT. According to the latter thesis, the viewer imagines seeing fictional things. Nobody but the Nolan brothers have that kind of trust from studios anymore. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know how the things are getting made nowadays, but what's it called? There was just a headline from the guy who's making Avatar. What the heck is his name? He also did Titanic. They were trying to, get him to do certain things, and he was just like, no, you're in a $500,000 building that I paid for with, like, Titanic. You don't get to tell me, like, how to, like, make my movies. But, like, yeah, so. But again, that would just go to show that he did not have the trust, and he had to argue with it, even though he's, consistently made blockbusters. So, if anyone gets, has a track history of making blockbusters, he does. Alright, the viewer imagines seeing fictional things. If seeing here means ordinary seeing, pictures play no role in the viewer's imaginative engagement. In ordinary perception, indeed, we have the impression of directly seeing things, not pictures of things. Hence, the way in which the viewer imagines seeing fictional things prevents one from positing the film narrator. To sum up, both literature and film may involve a periphery, but what there is in the periphery seems to be different. In literature, the periphery has two denizens. First, the narrator who makes linguistic assertions about the story world. Second, the imaginary counterpart of the reader, namely the narratee, who pays attention to the narrator's assertions, thereby gathering information about the story world. Oh, and have a great night. You can go play some games and play them badly. Well, hopefully you'll play them well. Thanks for stopping by. Maybe we'll raid you later if you're on. Samiak says, I'll explain one day why it is so intentional and meaningful. He was trying to address your question, who is the narrator, with thorough ambiguity. His answer is, the story is narrated merely by the film and not the dialogue. He had to do a lot outside the film to make that make sense inside the film, the point blurring the line between film and theater. The audience was forced to get involved or leave. So it's interesting. He wanted everyone to be sort of like getting themselves to tell the story a little bit, or to bug out. I guess that's like a good way to get engagement, to force the ambiguity on the people so that they had to get themselves, involved. All right. In film, on the other hand, the periphery seems to be inhabited only by the imaginary counterpart of the viewer, namely the observer who directly sees the events in the story world without the need of any narrator who would describe them through pictorial assertions. Yeah. The return of the modern epic. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting method. It's like forced ambiguity to get people to get their hands dirty in it. But like that's the sort of thing. Like in painting, sometimes you paint something very small to make sure the person has to get right up to it to see what you're doing. And there's like other things, like you can make a box around your like painting so that people have to view it from certain angles, and so you can force viewership to do certain things. And like that's an interesting question. Exactly what do you do? Like if you're making giant paintings, like certain stuff, like you make a very, very, very big painting, that means you can't actually see the whole thing. If you're like at a normal distance, you have to back up. Like Chuck Close paintings, for instance, I'm thinking of right here. Also, Andy Warhol with the drip paintings are very big, and if you see them, they're very impressive, but it's hard to grasp the whole thing at once. Horse Sam, welcome in. Bye, viewers. Follow and primes on mountainviews.com. Wow, you're so helpful. Let me write that down. Thanks. Oh, wow. I can't type. Ah.
What's the use of getting up? What's the use of eating? I'm only going to die someday anyway.
There we go. I'm still banned. No, well, you're just getting banned the manual way then. Where are we?
It's all going to end in death. Whether I arrange to do it to myself or
You're getting blocked. Block. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's all busted. Thank you, Twitch, for busting. You're great. I'm not even able to time out. Okay, that's just fantastic. Okay, that's really interesting. Why is this one busted but that one isn't? Let's see. Alright, so, whatevers. My apologies. But yeah. So back to this. Yeah, like I was saying, there's different ways to engage the audience with what you're doing, and yeah, how that is manufactured is interesting. Oh, thank you, Aris. Yeah, something's a little screwy with my chatting. Sorry to call you out of lurk. Anywho, how to reconcile the observer with the narrator. Okay, Relying on intuitions, one might be tempted to conclude that IoT refutes FNT instead of entailing it, as both defenders and critics of IoT are inclined to assume. Yet two strategies for defending the compatibility between truth of IoT and that of FNT remain available. The first strategy consists in interpreting IoT as the claim that the viewer imagines just seeing pictures that are visually recorded fictional events. Just as the reader of a novel reads sentences that are prescriptions to imagine as if they were assertions about the fictional world, thereby playing the role of the narratee, the viewer of a fictional film sees pictures that are prescriptions to imagine as if they were recordings of a fictional event, thereby playing the role of the observer. Yeah, Ara says, yeah, it's not even showing what happened on my end. Probably something weird going on. Yeah, because I have actually two chats up at any one point. One's like right here, so I can like, it's literally right next to the thing, so I can read both chat and the paper at once. But then I have another one, which is like the stream, like the Twitch stream deck, and it just does, that one seems to work when one doesn't, so maybe they're interfering with each other. Again, things are starting to break in my stream. It's not great. Anyhow. As Wilson puts it, we imagine motion picture shots as motion picture shots, but as motion picture shots for which the fictions they construct are real. From this perspective, the narrator becomes a subject who has produced and assembled those visual and possibly auditory recordings, the grand imaginer, or imaginer, something like that, as Wilson dubs them, borrowing the term from Christian Metz and Albert Laffey. If IoT claims that we imagine that the pictures we see on the screen are recordings of fictional events, FNT adds that the narrator is the grand imagier who in our imaginative project provides us with those recordings. Hence, IoT does no longer refute FNT. Indeed, the former nicely complements the latter. Yeah, so of course, if you're imagining seeing it, it's still controlled by somebody what you're imagining seeing, because there's like the shots are controlled. And that, so IoT then has a smaller component of like a narrator or someone who's in control of this, what you're imagining. And anyway, by the way, if anyone does not know, let's go try and do the shout out from the other one. Nope, I still can't shout you out in the using the new shout out stuff. But anyway, let's go give Iris a shout out. Boom, shout out. So everyone go check out Aris. He's a ethicist, good streamer, excellent streamer. And if you like philosophy content, you should go hang out with his streams. It's all good. Okay, the second strategy consists instead in interpreting IoT as the claim that the viewer imagines directly seeing fictional events, not visual recordings of fictional events. However, this interpretation of IoT does not commit itself to the claim that the viewer also imagines that her body is located at the same point from which she sees fictional events. In other words, the viewer imagines seeing from within the fictional space without imagining that her body is within that space. Yeah, because I mean, if you were in that space, like you would be in the sky sometimes, like looking at stuff, and that would be scary if you were actually in the sky looking down at things. Wilson, in his 1986, offers a simile that may help to clarify this interpretation of IoT. The observer is like the immaterial and imperceptible occupant of an immaterial and imperceptible capsule, which can freely move and jump within the fictional space-time. This simile also helps us to figure out the role of the narrator in this imaginative framework. The narrator is the subject who moves or displaces the observer's capsule within the fictional space-time. In this case, the narrator is not a grand imagier who produces visual recordings of fictional events, but rather an audio-visual presenter or perceptual enabler who directly provides the observer with viewpoints on those events. This scenario also enables us to reconcile IoT with FNT by casting the narrator as the source of the observer's perceptual access to the fictional world. Yeah, so it's basically like they're giving you the access to the other world in some sort of arbitrary way, but that's still controlled by them as they're showing you audio-visual stuff. At this point, one might object that both strategies rely on somehow metaphorical readings of IoT. That's like, how are you imagining things? That's the whole point of imagining, is not that there's a someone controlling it, is that you're imagining it. And so this would be a metaphorical reading of it, that there's someone controlling it as this grand imagier, like someone else is imagining it for you. That's not what imagining is. So this is an interesting question here. Who's doing the imagining when you're reading something of fiction? In the grand imagier strategy, the viewer imagines seeing fictional events through a sort of visual recording of them. In the perceptual enabler strategy, the viewer imagines seeing fictional events through a sort of immaterial and imperceptible capsule. Metaphors such as visual recording and immaterial capsule, if taken literally, generate observed imaginings which critics of IoT and FNT such as Curry, Gout, Carl, and Curran have aptly stressed. For example, one might wonder how visual recordings can be made if no camera was present, or if fictional events occurred, or which technology made possible the construction of the immaterial capsule. Trying to answer these questions within the viewer's imaginative project surely leads to observed imaginings. Yeah. So this is the problem. You can't actually be within the fictional world in the way that the fictional world is, because that would be very, very, very scary and weird. And that's the whole thing. If they had these technologies that allowed you to zoom around a fictional world, again, that would be very weird. Like, under almost any fictional world does not have, like, cameras into a different reality flying around. Defenders of IoT and FNT usually reply by stating that these are silly questions which do not deserve any answer within the imaginative project. Yet a reason why these questions are silly is to be offered, or yet to be offered. This needs a yet in here. I argue that these questions are silly because they wrongly turn metaphors aimed to describe the periphery of the story world into features of that world. In fact, there are neither visual recordings nor immaterial capsules within the story world. There is just a periphery from which that world can be seen in peculiar ways. These ways of seeing are unavailable both in our actual world and in the story world, but become available in the periphery, which, as such, is metaphysically anomalous with respect to both the actual world and the story world. Okay, so this is interesting. Again, this is postulating a viewpoint that does not exist in any world. You're looking at some world that does not exist because you're not in that world, but you can view into it, and you're not in the actual world because clearly the stuff in the fictional world is not happening. And so this is a weird third world in between the impossible fictional world and our actual world. And so this is this periphery is an interesting standpoint here. The observer and the narrator are denizens of the periphery, not of the story world. The visual recording and the immaterial capsule are only rhetorical attempts to illustrate the peripheral ways of seeing in terms of worldly objects such as recordings and capsules. Shane McGinnis says, but isn't that what imagination is? Yes, but exactly, that's harder to answer. I mean, easy to ask, hard to answer. Isn't that what imagination is? It's how do we actually understand what what counts as a fictional universe. Now we're imagining it, but again, the point the author is making here is that you're only ever seeing certain things, and so in some sense it's controlled within the fictional world what you're seeing. And so it's not that you're just looking at it a standpoint from this weird spot in between the real world and the fictional world. There's control going on. What does the director do? What the producer do? What's the narrator and the story telling you? So it's not like it's all your imagination either. And that's why there's this like weird space, which is not quite fiction and not quite reality. Now, I don't know if I buy all of that, but I think that's the best way of describing what's going on. Anywho, we should give Shane a shout out too. Shane is an excellent teacher also of sociology and history. You can go over to his stream and you can ask him basically anything about like history and sociology, and you're gonna get an interesting, good answer. Shane says, I would say that our imagination is always a third world. I don't think that we can ever imagine anything realistically. Yeah, well, you're gonna get yourself. This is part of the problem. What exactly is this third world here? Like, it's a real hard question to answer. And I was saying earlier, I don't know if you were here, but this really makes a difference also in like philosophical logic and math when you're saying you're thinking about numbers that maybe are too big to imagine, like we can't describe them, but we can like, give a formula for them, or things that might be contradictory and we don't think actually exist, or imaginary things like unicorns, which definitely don't exist here, but like what the fuck is that come down to, this third world where we can start to talk about it. Shane says we can get stuff to approach realism, but we can't get all the way there. Yeah, but like again, where is this weird space then that we don't quite exist in? And so that it's a hard question to like really understand. It's like, yeah, what do you mean we approach realism? Because we live in reality. That's the definition of where we are. But like then when we're talking about fiction, where did we go? And how did reality fail at that point? So, And that's, I guess, the point of this paper is to talk about this strange third world. The same location as our consciousness? Well, yeah, but again, that's not solving the problem because we don't know what the consciousness is either. And so you can define it that way, but again, that's not an answer. That's just saying, well, it's all what our brain does, but like that's not an answer. It's just saying, okay, it's all the stuff we don't understand how it works. So it's like, yeah, sure, but it's not gonna solve the problem at the moment. There's one of my favorite fallacies. It's ignotum per ignotius, which means trying to the ignorant from the even more ignorant. And then there's obscurum per obscurius, which is the obscure from the even more obscure. And that's kind of what's happening here, is that if you want to say, well, isn't the imagination just the mind and that's where it's all at? Yeah, but we don't understand. You're trying to solve the imagination with the mind, and the mind is just as hard or obscure, or what we're just as ignorant about it. So it's like you can't actually default to that because you're not explaining anything really. Now you might learn something like, oh yeah, like the relationship of the imagination to consciousness, but saying it's consciousness doesn't get you anywhere in the grand scheme of things. Well, if our physical brain architecture can't support or provide a genesis point of consciousness, doesn't mean it's not physical. Yeah, I mean that would be dualism. Sure, but again, then you have to explain dualism. Good luck with that one. That's just like, yeah, like other philosophers have worked very, very, very hard on this problem, and we're not, I don't think, solving it anytime soon. So it's like, if you want to do dualism, sure. If you don't want to do dualism, sure. Like plenty of people on both sides of the divide, but you're not going to explain imagination by like defaulting out to this sort of scheme. Like each side of the divide, whether you're a hard physicalist or a dualist, is going to have an explanation what the imagination is, but you're not going to get anywhere because you're just going to run into the same old problems of what is physicalism or what is dualism, and those are not, we don't have a good solution to what mind or imagination is in general, or consciousness is. So yeah, but that's the thing. That's why they're postulating this third realm here, this third world, this periphery from where we can, do something using whatever theory of mind you're doing to see into a fictional world, which we again don't have a great definition of, is just something we're saying isn't real. But what does that exactly mean? What is reality? Mr. Partiardi, welcome back. No. Shane, give yourself a little bit more credit than that. It's that this is, you're not wrong. It's just, I'm telling you that the strategy here is going to fail. And that's not your fault, actually, in terms of philosophy. It is a mistake everyone makes. It's not like that uncommon. It's just, why exactly does it fail is very interesting. And it's like, yeah, why does it fail to appeal to mind? When you're talking about imagination, it's because we don't actually have a full story of mind either. And so it's like, if we did, then we'd be good. But like, again, we wouldn't need to be asking these questions if we already had a full story of mind. So It's like this is a common thing that philosophers do, actually, is that they, oh, don't worry, that's like just theory of mind. But if we already had theory of mind, we wouldn't have any of these problems anyway. One of the other things goes back to Frege. Frege said that ideas came from a third realm. So it's like there's, reality. There's the world of forms, which is in some sense an imagination, and then where ideas came from is like this third space where, it's not actually in reality. It's not really in the the mathematical idealistic world. It's somehow we are connecting the two, and these ideas come to us from this third realm. And of course, if you look at the Germans, Third Reich, and so I always you see it always gets translated Third Realm, but it's like Third Reich in the German, and that just entertained me. Of course, Frege was writing before the politics of Germany went that way, but yeah. But yeah, this is what we're talking about. So this is exactly what I'm thinking, like in my head. This periphery is not the fictional world, it's not the real world, it's a third realm. And that's where these ideas are coming from, is the third realm. And so you can see Wittgenstein's coming and like, well, this is exactly the area of the philosophy world that you're getting this out of. Yeah, excuse me. The visual recording in the immaterial capsule are only rhetorical attempts to illustrate the peripheral ways of seeing in terms of worldly objects, such as recording in capsules. This is the third realm we're talking about here, not the real world, but not the fictional world, some other in-between spot. Yet what matters are not those objects, but just the peripheral ways of seeing that the objects illustrate. Those objects are like the ladder in Wittgenstein's remark concerning the reader of the Tractatus. He must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up on it. Yeah, so that's annoying, but not exactly accurate, but fine. Once the ladder, that is the visual recording or the immaterial capsule, is thrown away, silly questions reveal all their silliness. Now, see, I don't think these are silly questions. I don't think any of the questions that got asked in chat are silly. This is just very, very hard to actually define what this third realm is. And like I was saying, this is things people argue about. You need to have a theory of mind. And then when theory of mind fails, what do? You have to postulate something new. And that's kind of what this periphery is. What's up, Bravo? How you doing? So that's this third world. Yeah, yo, can you react to my first song? I don't do song reacts. I do a paper reacts on this channel. I'm sorry about that. I don't do song reacts on this channel. But if you want to hang out, that's cool. But like, yeah, no song reacts. I don't know enough about music, frankly. No, like I said, no song reacts, no lyric video either. Like, if you had like poetry or something, that'd be more of a possible thing. But like, yeah, or hey, IQOCQ, what's up? But yeah, not really what I do here. But like, if you're welcome to hang out, chill out. We're just discussing some philosophical ideas. That's kind of what we discuss. Yeah. Sure, but like if it was actual poetry, then we could discuss that. But I don't do, like I said, no music reacts. It's not what I do. You finished the 70 exams. Wow, 70 exams. Yikes. That's a lot. Yeah. So what you were grading? What for? Like your? We'll see. The professor isn't happy the grades were too high, apparently. Yeah. What are you gonna do? I mean, they can curve it if they want later, but it's a pain. If philosophy of cognitive science class, yeah, and you're a TAing, right? Yikes. Well, I mean, good luck with that. I mean, it's very hard to, 150 to grade tomorrow at least. That's like really, really disgusting. Yeah. And it's funny, it's like you wonder why people drink. Like I used to, when the very brief time I do it, I'd like have a glass of wine and I'd sit there and I'd be like, all right, 50 to go. Like try not to get too drunk. Yeah. Like grading is such a pain in the butt. Cinesemiac says you should have one episode a year where you have open requests and you perform magic tricks or sing for us or whatever. 5 min max. Yeah, you dance, monkey, dance on stream. Yeah. Perhaps. You know, I don't know if you were around late last philosophy roulette, but I have reacted to philosophical YouTube videos before, not music videos, but philosophical YouTube videos, and so like if you have something of like interest where someone's describing something, I have done that. Like Vipers requested that, so I'm not against reacting to philosophical content in a video form. But yeah, I'm not just gonna go listen to songs all of a sudden. Yeah, I mean I guess I could, but I mean there's also points redeems I could make for being silly and doing other stuff. Like yeah, 100,000. You want me to watch your video? 100,000 channel points. Okay. See, we're on 8 of 15 here. This is why I was saying it was long. So, all right, 8 of 14 basically, or 13. We'll get there. The narrator and the filmmaker. Yeah. Anyway, I'll take suggestions if you guys have things you want me to talk about or do. Like you can like put it in chat or like put it in the Discord, and I will consider it. What I really was thinking of recently was getting more emotes done, and then you could like vote on the papers or like describe it. So like you could have like a like wisdom emote, like is this a wise paper or a stupid emote, like is this a stupid paper? Because I mean there's always the vote yay and like vote nay. So like you could have like this sort of thing, like a yay nay vote on these things, and then you could have like a command, and you could see like how many yays versus nays on any given paper, and that might be a fun mechanism for chat interactions having to do with papers, of course. So it's something like that. I have been watching a stream called Excessive Profanity, who's not a small streamer at this point, I wouldn't say. He's a medium, I don't know exactly what counts as large, but he's, regularly in the thousands of viewers, like 1,000, 2,000 viewers. And he actually, because so many people are there, he gets a lot of trolls, or he had a lot of trolls, a lot of people come into it, and he has executions where the chat actually votes on banning people, and so like chat will ban people, and so we could do something similar. Like you could vote on an author. Should I read another author again in the chat based on their work and how interesting their stuff is? Then like chat could vote on it, and if the yays have it, then I'll read another paper from them. So there's like all sorts of mechanics that we could bring in, like given a little work with emotes, because you have like emote counters, things like that. Yeah. So I think Excessive Profanity might even be streaming right now still. He was on earlier. And for anyone who is interested in literature and stuff, Excessive Profanity used to be I think a video game critic. He is very well spoken about like what's going on in games. He sits around talking about the stuff, so you might Excessive Profanity. You might actually find it interesting to go check out his stream. Yeah, that's his. You can see his logo there. So that's Excessive Profanity. And yeah. Okay, cool. Even if one acknowledges that the visual recordings. Oh, that's a cool. Is that you have an Aristotle emote? That's really cool. Yeah, exactly. So this is the sort of thing we could use, like an Aristotle thing. You find it hard to spend money on stream when I'm not making money off of streaming? That's true. I mean, I wouldn't want... None of you have to subscribe. I always appreciate it when you do. But I was going to make it... What was it? The... just the follower streamer emotes. I was probably going to do that. So... Like, that would be what I would do. I just didn't want to use the yays and nays. I mean, I could. But... Like, that was some of the things I was thinking about. Like, I could make, it'd be more fun if they, it was more fancy than the yay or nay emotes. But, like, it'd just be for the follower emotes. So, like, you could get it when you were here. Yeah, I mean, I don't actually subscribe to that many people. So, yeah. No, same with me, Shane, too. Like, I don't have the art skills, and that's one of the reasons I haven't done it. There's a bunch of things I need to do on the graphic side, not just for streaming, but for other stuff. And basically, that's I'm gonna have to pay someone. And I don't want to spend any more money because, like I said, I don't make any significant money off this, and so it's I have to justify it some other way. But yeah, but like it's like if it would really be fun, I might do it, or I might just use the yay and nay emotes. But yeah, I have to get my stream being less broke. Yeah, Fiverr, absolutely, IQ. I've used Fiverr before for stuff, and it has mostly worked out for things I've wanted. Again, like I don't want a shitty emote. Like just I've gotten shitty thing work done there, but like what I do is I spent a bunch of money across a few different creators on Fiverr, and I just picked the best one. But like that's the thing. It's like if I need a few emotes, I gotta plan this out. It's a bunch of work to really well describe a artistic piece that you need, so that people can do it. Radical Disability, what's up? How you been? Good to see you here. Go down to Pratt and hire a student. That is another thing. Like, yeah, absolutely, I could do that. There are people in various communities I'm part of that also, have recommendations. They do this as a hobby. That would be like, like at least then I'd have better, at least a history with the people or, recommendations. So, this is the thing. But like, again, I need to fix my, I'm not getting any alerts today. I need to upgrade certain things on the computer. Then I like these graphic things I need for both this and like Minesweeper. I want to, fix up some of my old graphics. Things to do. And I'd have to sponsor a font actually for that other stuff. So yeah. But like this is, all can be done. All can be done. It may not even be that expensive in the end, but it does cost money. Yeah, exactly, Shane. OBS is, I have not updated my OBS because I was hoping to keep everything working for a while, but now I think OBS is starting to break on me because it's, everything else is moving on and like OBS has not. And so I think it needs to update so it can get hooked into like the events again. The event. Like so, if someone donates here, then you get the alerts, and I'm not getting them right now. Anywho, okay, the narrator and the filmmaker. Oh, Radical, what do you got to say? You're finding there's tons of hostility on Twitch. Like I give my opinions and they're not favorable. Even my civil rights talking points are not favorable. Wow. Yeah, a lot of people are hostile here. It's true. And you have to find yourself a good community where you can talk about stuff. A lot of people do not want to hear like counter opinions. So it's yeah, it's not so easy. I mean, I have a few communities where like I hang out, but like I said, the person just shouted out excessive profanity. I didn't talk in his stream for a long time because people were so fast with the bans. Boom, you'd get yourself kicked off the stream. And I didn't want to get kicked off the stream. I liked it there. So now I have a better idea on like how not to get myself kicked out, but like they were fast with the bans. And so I was like, yeah. If you disagree, that is clearly a sign that you are a bigot. Yeah, well, it's probably true because I mostly agree with you, Shane, so yeah, so I hope you're handling the hostility well, Radical Disability, because it's not fun to deal with, and I hope you're doing well with that, because even like just like random people saying stupid things on the internet, I know it doesn't always feel great. So yeah, and if you want to say like stuff here, like that's fine. I know that I disagree with lots of people on lots of things. It happens. I try to be understanding about it, even if I disagree. And I've actually said this before, this is not technically a safe space. I can't guarantee that we're going to talk about things that are safe topics all the time. There are going to be some unsafe topics. So I was trying to think of a policy a while back. So instead of I'm safe, I am actually... This is not a safe space. This is a hostile space. That's my general policy here, is that this is not a safe space. Topic safety cannot be guaranteed here. Instead, this is an actively hostile space to anyone who is anti-LGBTQIA, racist, etc. Best to keep your shitty opinions to yourself or expect consequences. This is not a safe space, but you can, if you fuck around, you can expect to find out. Yeah. So that's basically my policy. So, not safe, but it will be dangerous if you have bad opinions. Okay. The narrator and the filmmaker. Yeah. Fuck around, find out. It's like, yeah, you can come in here and, like, talk about stuff, but, like, that's not gonna... but, like, you're gonna get banned if you're being a dickhead about it. Even if one acknowledges that the visual recordings and the immaterial capsule are nothing but rhetorical devices which do not threaten the consistency of IoT, one may still insist on the dispensability of the narrator. Specifically, one might argue that the viewer imagines seeing fictional events, but in her imaginative project, the way in which perceptual access to those events is given to her might remain indeterminate. Again, yeah, what's your standpoint in the third realm? Where are you looking at when you're in the periphery? There might not be a specific narrator. It may be something indeterminate, which is interesting. Damn right, semiotics, and don't you forget it. Thus, imagining being the observer of fictional events does not entail imagining the narrator as the source of those events. IoT does not entail IST. Theater is a case in which imagining the observer without imagining the narrator seems to be quite plausible. The viewer of a play can imagine seeing fictional events without the need of a further imagining concerning an agent who would enable her to see those events. The events are just there in front of her to be seen. But see, that's really interesting because, of course, there's staging of a play. Like the idea that it's not what you're seeing is not very highly determined by like the director and the actors is, of course, that's the whole point of a play. But like, yeah, there's nothing mediating when you see it at that time. But again, it's highly mediated what you are watching. Okay, still the medium of film has specific features that the medium of theater lacks, namely framing and editing, which enable films to change the observer's point of view in a way that is not available to plays. To properly understand a fiction film, the viewer should acknowledge that the change of her point of view is the effect of an intentional action taken by a rational subject for communicative purposes. Is Walter Benjamin because this is the philosophy of theater, right? They have not mentioned Walter Benjamin here. I don't actually know. Aris, just don't. No, they have not talked about we're talking more about philosophy of film, not philosophy of theater here. I don't know Benjamin, actually. I just think that's how you say it. But, yeah, I don't know. This is the honest answer, Radical. That maybe this is something off that. I feel like we could turn this into an inside joke. Just, no. I'm with Radical on this one. Just, no. Like, you could see some, like, real edgy philosopher getting that tattooed on them. But, like, that'd be terrible. Yeah, just bad. Just bad Aristotle. This is one of those, like, horny, what's it called? Like, thump? What's the, thump, yeah, the bonk. This is a bonk. Yeah, right next to your finger point. Yeah, this is like a philosophical bonk. Just don't. Yeah, like a horny bonk, philosophical bonk. Stop. Just don't. Like, bad. Bad Iris. Bad. Down boy. Give Lala a treat for me. Yeah. The viewer is imagining seeing a certain fictional event from a given viewpoint, and suddenly the viewpoint changes because of a camera movement or editing. Hence, the viewer can wonder why this happened, thereby acknowledging that somebody intentionally did so to help her to better understand what is going on in the fictional world. For example, when a cut replaces a close-up of a character with a shot of an object, the viewer is entitled to infer that the character is looking at that object. Radical Disability says, edgy philosopher, I don't see any corners. Yeah, okay. Alright, for anyone who doesn't know what Aristotle did, you can see the symbolism, the upside down A, and the horseshoe, which is kind of looks like a subset symbol. But that's a logical that's logical notation. So that's formal logic he's writing there, where it basically says if anyone fucks around, then they find out. So if you fuck around, you're going to find out. But it was just using logical notation, which again is, just stop. Yeah. The so-called Kuleshov effect exploits this inference to trigger a further inference concerning affective states. If what follows the close-up of a man is a shot of a bowl of soup, then the man might feel hunger. If it is a shot of a coffin, he might feel grief. If it is a shot of a woman, he might feel desire. Completely excessive and pretentious, like philosophy. Yes. That is a job hazard of being a philosopher, is to being excessive and pretentious. And that's okay. But again, bonk. Yeah, that was Graham Harmon. It's just, he said like being pretentious is just a job hazard. You have to just accept it when you're a philosopher. It's like, that's okay. But like, yeah, I know. But like, still got to get called out on it. Changes in point of view can also license inferences concerning spatial and temporal distances. For example, when a cut replaces a viewpoint on a character walking in the street with a viewpoint on that character sitting in her armchair at home, the viewer is entitled to infer that some time has passed, and in the meanwhile the character arrived home. The temporal distance can even be a vast one, as in the bone-to-spaceship cut in Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which entitles the viewer to infer not only that much time has passed, but also that a genealogical connection holds between the two objects. The bone is the starting point of a historical development whose endpoint is the spaceship. Relying on Paul Grice's account of communication, we might say that there is a cooperative communicative activity involving the observer and narrator. Radical said, well, it's not pretentious. Radical philosophy is often, well, at least philosophers are often pretentious. Yeah. I know, this is hitting some of your stuff here, Cinesemiotics. Yeah, more Kubrick quotes, please. Alright, when the point of view undergoes a change, the observer is entitled to wonder why the narrator did that, under the assumption that the narrator is cooperating with her, thereby helping her to properly understand what is going on in the story world. Yes, most famous jump cut in in film history. Yeah, super famous. Such reflection on the reason why the observer's viewpoint has changed enables her to gather further pieces of information about the fictional world that would not be accessible if she limited herself to perceiving from the given viewpoints. If a cut links a close-up of a character to a shot of an object, the observer can directly see the character and then the object, but the fact that the character is looking at the object is to be inferred under the assumption that the narrator has changed the viewpoint to help the observer to better understand the story. A cinesemiotic semi. Okay, I'm happy for your semi. Wonderful jump cut right there to cinesemiotic semi. Likewise, in the example of the cut linking the street to the house, the observer can directly see the character walking in the street and then the character sitting in the armchair, but the fact that the character arrived home in the meanwhile is to be inferred under the assumption that the narrator is guiding the observer in the exploration of the story world. The same assumption in 2001: A Space Odyssey enables one to infer from the bone-to-spaceship cut that the spaceship is the ultimate effect of a historical process originated by the bone. Yeah. So actually, I'm trying to think. Would that actually be funny? Is there like a pretentiousness emote that would be good? Because that'd be something that you wouldn't get in other channels. So like if I made a pretentiousness emote, then would that be good? Because that would be an interesting thing to have. Like you're being pretentious, like a pretentious face, as opposed to like a Kappa face or the lull face or the Keck W face. Radical says the rich kids with A's, those bourgeois philosophers, Lamau, people like Edmund Burke, Lamau. I don't listen to them; they just drown. Yeah, so that's true. Single. Oh yeah, okay. A single hand with a pinky up. Yeah. Can you get an angle of you looking down your own nose, like that sort of thing? Yeah. Ostentatiously drinking LaCroix. Yeah. Yeah, but see, that's interesting. Like this sort of thing. There's definitely pinky up emotes I've seen before, but I don't know if I can do smug right now. No, I don't know if I can pull Monopoly guy emote. Yeah, see, that's the thing. There's definitely a little bit like pinky up emotes or like Monopoly guy style things. Yeah, but like if they're like sort of like academic pretentiousness, I don't know if there is one like that before. But like see, that would be fun because like if you guys were able to like if I'm reading a paper and like the author starts getting pretentious and y'all all of a sudden start putting pinky up emotes in chat, that would be kind of a fun thing. And then you could say, how pretentious was this? Well, this was 7 pinky ups, like by the end of the paper. Samuel Cumming, not Cinesemiotics Cumming. Samuel Cumming, Gabriel Greenberg, and Rory Kelly have argued that the meaning of some changes of viewpoint in film can be explained in terms of general semantic conventions rather in terms of context-dependent pragmatic mechanisms such as those described above. Jean Piaget. Yet, even if one assumes for the sake of the argument that those authors are right, the fact remains that the alleged semantic conventions cannot exhaust the meaning of all changes of viewpoint in film. Radical says, well, isn't Jordan Peterson a Monopoly guy emote? Yeah, kind of. I thought he was a little crying baby because didn't he get like all insulted? Jean Piaget? Yes. You with a monocle and a mortarboard? Yeah. Okay. I try not to be too pretentious, Shane. Although maybe I could bust out a monocle one day. That'd be kind of funny. Just like, have a monocle I could like put in. Specifically, Cumming, Greenberg, and Kelly individuate conventions that would govern changes of viewpoint aimed to explore a certain environment, but there are other changes of viewpoint that essentially depend on context-dependent factors and therefore cannot be satisfactorily explained in terms of semantic conventions. No semantic convention, for example, can enable viewers of Fritz Lang's M to infer from the cut that links a woman setting the table for lunch to a little girl leaving school that the woman is waiting for her daughter. Viewers can draw that inference only by presupposing that the scenes are shown to them by a rational agent who is intentionally cooperating with them for communicative purposes. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. There's going to be a lot of jumps, but there's always a lot of jumps in inferences in language. What does cancel a button word do? For like the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you pick a word and I won't say that word. So like, if you pick the word, say, rational, I would not be allowed to say the word rational. Of course, you can't use words like is, no prepositions, things that I have to say. But and a lot of times, like if it's a word that's used in a paper, I'll just reject it. But like if you can, I'll cancel a word, and so yeah, I just won't say it for a while. I've seen I hadn't seen it. I recently saw a streamer actually had the exact same thing too. I had never seen anyone else do it. Yeah, I haven't used it in a while because I used to do more, like non-philosophy streams, but it's very hard when I'm like reading a paper to a lot of times get away from certain words because, if they're used in the paper a lot, then it would change the meaning of the paper. if I stopped using that word. Because, things are synonymous, but not exactly synonymous. But yeah, that's what cancel a word does. FNT identifies as rational agent with the narrator. To grasp the meaning of the peculiar changes of viewpoint that are crucial to film experience, the viewer should imagine not only that she is the observer of fictional events, as IoT states, but also that the narrator is providing her with viewpoints on those events. Here is a sense in which endorsing IoT may lead one to endorse also FNT. Yeah, I think I was saying something very similar to this earlier, that even if you think you're looking at certain events, you're still getting a certain perspective, and that would mean that there is someone controlling the perspective of imagination at that point. It might be objected, however, that FNT is not required to make sense of the changes of viewpoint, since the viewer can grasp the meaning of those changes simply by conceiving of the filmmaker as a rational agent who is helping her to understand fictional events. The viewpoint imagines being the observer, as IoT states, but when the viewpoint changes, the viewer can make sense of this by considering her actual cooperation with the filmmaker rather than the imaginary cooperation between the observer and the narrator. Hence, endorsing IoT would not lead to endorsing also FNT. But what's interesting about this, I was thinking about this earlier, but again, it's not exactly the filmmaker, because you don't know the filmmaker, and the filmmaker at that particular time might be doing something, so it might be a particular version of the filmmaker when they're narrating a certain sort of thing. So it's not just the filmmaker, but it's the filmmaker in a certain, mindset doing certain things at that time, which might not be like Stanley Kubrick, but it might be Stanley Kubrick imagining himself to do certain things. And at that point, that would be Stanley Kubrick as the narrator, not Stanley Kubrick as, the person. So you gotta, it's like, even if you're trying to convince yourself that you're having a relationship with the, the director or the filmmaker, that is not a static thing. Like, that could be a changing thing, or a very specific thing at a specific time. Author says, still, the combination of IoT with FNT seems to have an explanatory advantage compared to the combination of IoT with the actual cooperation between the viewer and filmmaker. Both combinations enable the viewer to properly draw inferences from the changes in viewpoint, but only the former enables the viewer to do so within her imaginative project. If IoT is combined with FNT, the viewer can draw inferences from changes in viewpoints while she is playing the role of observer. Yeah, see, this is interesting. You have to start playing certain roles. And it's not that you're just the observer, but that you can be an observer changing. So you're playing a role. For example, she imagines seeing the gaze of the character and then the object, and by relying on the cooperative stance of the narrator, she can infer that the character is looking at the object. If instead IoT is combined with the cooperation between viewer and filmmaker, the viewer is forced to consider the character as the performance of an actor and the object as a piece of production design, despite imagining seeing the character and the object as fictional entities. Radical says, yeah, they're talking about physical urge of the observer to be transported and mentally immersed into an experience and imagination of the filmmaker's creation. Yeah, so exactly what is real here. So if you're talking about, and now they're saying, yeah, like, this is what this is up here, is that you're talking about the narrator, but then down here, like what we're getting into now, is if you're dealing with the filmmaker as filmmaker and not as narrator, then you're thinking too much about the production of the film and not talking about the film itself, but how the film was made. And author says that is because interacting with the filmmaker, who is the agent who created fictional entities, forces the viewer to cast these entities as created in our actual world instead of as existing in the story world. The viewer is thus forced to give up the role she was playing, namely the observer, thereby temporarily going back from her game world to the actual world. Yeah, like then you're talking about like actors. You're not talking about the characters, you're talking about the actors in the real world. So that's that would be a problem, actually, if you're thinking that you're dealing directly with the filmmaker. Interacting with the narrator, on the other hand, does not have this shortcoming. The narrator is the agent who provides the observer with the information about fictional entities, not the agent who created them. Hence, while interacting with the narrator, the viewer can keep playing the role of observer, thereby preserving her place in the periphery. Yeah, see, it's such a weird thing. Like, where is this periphery? Like, this is the whole thing. What is a periphery? The same point can be made by considering that most fiction films are made in a way that leads the viewer to focus on fictional events rather than on actual actors and settings. As Robert Hopkins aptly points out, the viewer of a fiction film is led to experience a photographic representation of fictional events, even though she rather faces a photographic representation of a staged representation of fictional events. In the viewer's experience, the staged tier disappears, or in Hopkins' terms, collapses. Yet, if the viewer should interact with the filmmaker to infer the meaning from changes of viewpoint, the staged tier would systematically reappear. Since fiction films are carefully crafted to remove the staged tier from the viewer's experience, it would be odd to restore this tier each time the meaningful changes of viewpoint occur. IoT and FNT avoids this odd consequence by enabling the viewer to play the role of the observer and to draw inferences by interacting with the narrator. If all this is right, the combination of IoT with FNT helps the viewer to preserve the continuity of her imaginative project in which she imagines being the observer. Giving up FNT instead would threaten such continuity by breaking the imaginative engagement with fiction when changes of viewpoint occur. Alright, so this is interesting. It's just like, look, you need the concept of a narrator that is working with you, which is interesting. You are working with a narrator at any given point. When something that changes in the film that you wouldn't be able to do in like theater, well, that's not exactly true, because theater can also rotate sometimes, and they can do fancy things on stage. But the idea that you can like jump around in films means that you're not actually physically moving, but like you're seeing something that has a structure to it. And it's hard to see the structure if you're talking about the film production, because the film production then again brings back too much reality into it. The narrator's contribution to the aesthetic appreciation of films. The changes of viewpoint due to the camera movement and editing show that the viewer of a fiction film should appeal to some communicative agency to properly understand the fictional events that, according to IoT, she imagines seeing. Such communicative agency might be ascribed to either the narrator, as FNT states, or to the filmmaker. In the previous section, I have argued that the former ascription is preferable, since unlike the latter, it does not force the viewer to break her imaginative project of perceptual exploration of the story world. Hey Acula, how you doing? My day was okay. I drank a little too much yesterday, so I'm a little tired today, and it kind of put me out of whack. Well, I'm not like I'm hungover, but I'm just like out of whack slightly. But I'm okay. I was thinking about if we were thinking of having a round table between some of our, Shane and Aris on a thing about. There was a paper on is Lord of the Rings racist. I was thinking about how to stage that, actually. So like this whole like sort of staging thing was in my head all day, to tell you the truth. Like, how should that be staged? How are you doing anyway? Hope you're doing well. How's school going? Yet one might object, the main goal of the viewer from an aesthetic perspective is not the imaginative exploration of the story world, but rather the appreciation and evaluation of the fictional film as an outcome of human creativity. In this sense, communicative agency is to be ascribed to the filmmaker, not to the narrator, even if doing so involves temporary breaks of the viewer's imaginative project. Therefore, although IoT might stand, FNT should fall. Well, I mean, they're going to argue against this, clearly, because they argue against this right here, but only in the last moment, when you're reconsidering the whole film, does that fall. During the course of the film, like, you have to see what is going on, and then, as the author has argued, FNT should be helpful to think about things being narrated in some way. Okay, thanks, Shane. To know, yeah, I was just thinking what would be the most convenient thing to make. I mean, if you just want to sit around and talk about it, then we can just like shoot this shit on Twitch. But if the better product would be a YouTube video, I'm thinking like that might actually be a better thing. Oh wow, you're in hurricane area. You're operating on unreliable hotspot. Well, thank you for using your hotspot to watch my stream. But yeah, good luck with cleaning up after the hurricane. Yeah. about the round table, I just think it would be interesting to, it would be, if it's a little bit more organized in terms of what we're discussing, I think we could have a better discussion, or it'd be at least a better YouTube video. Radical Disability says, did you know that I am a philosophy major myself, but I am more in political philosophy, so I work with both poli-sci and philosophy together. No, I did not know that, Radical. That's cool. I mean, are you currently, or are you like, were you, and like that's how you ended up? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think you do need. I agree with the author here. You need the narrator mostly. It's only when you're reflecting on the film afterwards that you no longer need the narrator, because you watch the whole thing and then you can think of the film as a whole. Yeah, Shane, I'm trying to think of what is actually the best angle on this. I mean, I'm still thinking the evil philosopher trope is the best angle. You're still one, but you're taking positive. Oh, finances and stuff. Yeah, whatever reason, that's fine. School is not easy for lots of reasons, and so people shouldn't feel too bad about like things not going like the expected route. There's very little going for the expected route, other than it just being what people expect. Okay. Author says, I argue, Ackley says, I'm about to submit your UNC application. What do you know about the Rutgers University philosophy program? If anything, I met one of the professors at a seminar. Rutgers University philosophy is one of the top philosophy programs in the entire world. So it's very, very competitive. It has, and it does a lot of things well. That doesn't mean it does everything well. It does a lot of things well. And so you should be, make sure that like they have people there that you want to work with. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter where you go. But like if you're looking to be a philosophy major, then it will matter. But I don't think it's not like you're applying to grad school yet, so it will make less of a difference. But yeah, especially if you're can get like in-state, although if you're without power, you're probably not in-state for Rutgers. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking to take philosophy classes, they've got world-class people at Rutgers. Yeah, cool, Radical. I mean, always doing something. That philosophy, that's great. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if you have like specific questions about like Rutgers program. It might be better to like ask in Discord like mine or Aristotle's. Then we can talk more specifically about like things there in that program and the people and what you want to do. But yeah, but like I said, if you're just you'd be applying to undergrad, I believe, so it's less important in terms of just the philosophy. Yeah. And you come from the continental tradition? Well, that's cool. Yeah, I don't know much. I know comparatively more analytic. I don't know a whole lot continental. Yeah, you're in state for UNC. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned that last time too. But yeah, UNC is an excellent school. So but like I said, Rutgers is a very top program in terms of philosophy. But again, since you're also going, I think, undergrad, what exactly else do you want to do there? Rutgers is a big school, so maybe you can do that. Yeah, and so as Ara says, I mean, if you're doing ethics, then of course like UNC is great. So yeah. So, but again, if like they've got good philosophers there, it won't make as much of a difference because like they already have a good program, and even if they don't do everything, they're probably going to have enough that'll be interesting for you and give you a flavor of all the different stuff you might want to do. So I mean, of course, if you have specific interests, like if you want to go be a Hegel scholar, like you have to go somewhere where there is a Hegel scholar. But like if you're just interested in general, yeah. Rutgers is hot shit. Yeah, they're, like I said, Rutgers is a very top program across the board. They have a lot of people, and so, yeah. Alright, so we're talking about, can we get rid of the narrator in the last review. The author says, I argue that this objection relies on a too intellectualist conception of aesthetic appreciation, which mistakenly severs the appreciation of films as artifacts from the exploration of the story world. If the fiction film is an artifact whose function consists in affording the exploration of the story world, a proper appreciation of the artifact should be as close as possible to the environment, to the enjoyment of the exploration. Valpo says, yeah, hopefully we can get back soon. There aren't many of us continental folks. And, yeah, there isn't a continental Rutgers or NYU for better or worse. Yeah. It was too bad. There was a Stony Brook out on Long Island had a strong continental department. And they were SUNY Stony Brook, and SUNY cut the fucking program because they're dickheads and they ran out of money and didn't like it. And so that was really unfortunate because that was actually, they had a bunch of continental philosophers over there. But it's gone now, and it's sad. Hence, what we need is a way of exploring the story world that can also favor the appreciation of the film as an artifact without the need of relentlessly switching between one activity and the other, which seems to be problematic, especially if the film affords immersion. Yeah, I'd say that like this is actually even going overboard. You need to understand the story at the end, but when you're in the story, you need to just experience it. Ackley says, and even if the ethics weren't necessarily focused, you're implying that it doesn't matter as much for an undergrad degree if you attend a program focused more on ethics. Yeah, because they're going to have people that teach general courses. No philosophy department only teaches ethics. They're going to have someone that at least is competent to teach across the board. And so as an undergrad, it won't make as much difference unless you, again, you know that you want to do, say, philosophy of cognitive science, and then you want to be somewhere where they have a cog sci program. But yeah, it won't. Yeah, what Aristotle says is also true. Like, if you're looking to be an academic philosopher, then reputation matters, but again, reputation in your area, but that means you'd have to know what you're doing, and that's true. Like, if you're going on to grad school, you like your Marxist stuff. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I mean, then if you were looking at that's radical. That's not accolade. Sorry. Yeah, historical things where you're doing political philosophy. Okay, cool. Yeah, so if you're looking to be an academic accolade, then you want to go to a higher ranked place. But again, if you're it depends what you're focused on. Yeah. Okay. By supplementing the exploration of the story world with the acknowledgement of an agency that guides this exploration, FNT positively contributes to the appreciation of the film as an artifact. Although FNT does not involve directly casting the film as an outcome of human creativity, it involves an appreciation of the communicative skills of the narrator, which is somehow preliminary to the appreciation of the creative skills of the filmmaker. FNT thus throws the seeds of aesthetic appreciation, as it were, in the very middle of the imaginative exploration, thereby bridging the gap between the viewer's exploration of the story world and her appreciation of the film as an artifact. Such contribution of the FNT to aesthetic appreciation can be clarified by deploying the notion of form and content. Following Richard Eldridge, I take content to designate the things in the narrative, and form to designate the manipulative operation on the narrative and on the medium whereby it is narrated. Specifically, I call content star, individuals, properties, relations, and story and events in the story world of a fiction film, and form star, the manipulations of points of view whereby the narrator presents those contents to the viewer who plays the role of the observer. If one assumes that appreciation involves considering how form configurates, come on. See, right here we need a little pinky up. Configurates, not just configures, but configurates content. A first piece of appreciation can already occur within the viewer's imaginative project by considering how form star configurates content. Then, adopting a reflexive attitude towards her imaginative project, the viewer can finalize her appreciation by treating form star and content star as the contents of the game world, namely form as content and content as content, form star as content and content star as content. These constitute the two dimensions of content of the fiction film. Yeah, so you have to you have to do a two-level thing, is what they're saying. You can experience the fictional work as a fictional work, and then you can then reflect on it to see how well they did it. And that's basically what's going on here. And you have to be able to do both at the same time sometimes, because, there is content, and then there's how the content was presented. And you could say the content was good here, but it was clumsily presented, or you could say this was really well presented, but there wasn't much content. But you can clearly make that distinction. But you still need the concept of the narrator, as they were saying, to properly understand what is the content in the world that you're supposed to get. In this way, the viewer can finally consider how the film as an artifact configurates its content through its form. On the one hand, the form of a fiction film configurates its content star as content through features such as screenplay, production design, acting, and direction, which determines what occurs in the story world. On the other hand, form configurates form star as content through features such as cinematography and editing, which determine what happens in the periphery. Following Marcel Villaume, one might call what happens in the periphery the secondary fiction as opposed to the primary fiction, which takes place in the story world. In this sense, form star individuates the secondary fiction, just as content star individuates the primary one. Yeah, so in the reflective thing, you have this, again, secondary world, reflective area where you can do that, and that's talking about what is happening to the viewer. Once the viewer has individuated content star, that's the meta level, by playing the role of the observer in the primary fiction, and form star by imaginatively interacting with the narrator in the secondary fiction, she can finalize her aesthetic appreciation by considering how the form of the film as an artifact has configurated. Come on, configurated, how many times are we going to say configurated? Configurated the two dimensions of its content. These are form star as content and content star as content, which correspond to the form star and content star respectively, when the latter are considered from without the viewer's imaginative engagement. If all this is right, the combination of IoT and FNT affords an aesthetic appreciation of fiction films that can be subtler and more rewarding than that provided by the mere combination of IoT with the recognition of the filmmaker's agency. Appreciating a fiction film from this perspective, it is not just a matter of enjoying the imaginative exploration of the story world and then assessing the film as an artifact. Appreciation is already at work during the exploration by virtue of FNT, which enables the viewer, while playing the role of the observer, to assess the manipulative activity of the narrator. Conclusion. Although there seem to be good reasons to posit the narrator in literary fictions, the observer plays no role in them. The imaginative role that the reader of a novel is meant to play is that of the narratee, who is a subject gathering linguistic information about the story world. The observer instead is a subject who gathers perceptual information about the story world. Arguably, theater and film differ from literature because the imaginative engagement with the former arts involve playing the role of the observer rather than that of the narratee. On the one hand, imagining being the narratee surely entails interacting with the narrator, since linguistic information should have some agency as its source. On the other hand, imagining being the observer might not have this consequence. The observer, in principle, might perceptually explore the story world on her own. If this were the case, IoT would stand, but FNT would fall. Perhaps the best explanation of our engagement with theater would only require the observer, not the narrator. This suggests that the literature, theater, and film are different from a phenomenological perspective, since literature involves the narrator without the observer, theater involves the observer without the narrator, and film involves them both. This comparative proposal is compatible with what I have argued in this paper and is surely worth exploring. However, the aim of my paper was just to investigate how IoT and FNT are related in film. I'd have to take a little argument that theater, of course, is less static than the author is giving it here, because the you can do many things on stage that are ways of presenting things to the audience. And so just because there's people are in their seats and you can't like zoom in, that doesn't mean like the whole stage can't rotate. Doesn't mean you can't lift things up on stage and like push them down and back and forth. So it's just limited in what you can do in theater, but it's just different. So good point, Aristotle. Theater can also break the fourth wall way more easily. So yeah, exactly. I would just say that theater and movies, of course, you have a lot more options in movies, but the theater also has like different things available to it, like breaking the fourth wall. You can just talk to people in the audience, which you can't do in movies. Yeah, theater will be different every performance too. A film is the same every time. Yeah, it's very, very similar in theater. Of course, you could like move yourself around in your chair and look at it from a different angle, but it's mostly that's almost exact. It's going to be exactly the same. Theater, I mean, every time is going to be slightly different, and you're going to have slightly different interactions. And so there's different things here. And so the idea that there isn't a narrator going on, the actors are actually may have more input into the way things are going in that specific play, and so that is actually creating the narration of the scene as it is going. And so I think this is a little unfair to theater here, saying it doesn't exist, that you can't see a narrator there, but yeah, it's just different. So but it's an interesting point. It's just a very different sort of thing. Okay, FNT directly entails IoT. If the narrator is the agent who offers perceptual access to the story world, the observer is needed as the beneficiary of such access, otherwise the narrator's activity would be pointless. Yet I have argued IoT does not directly entail FNT, since the observer might have perceptual access to the story world without any agent giving that access to her, just as we have perceptual access to our environment without any agent giving it to us. Nevertheless, I have argued, if one endorses IoT, endorsing FNT provides us with a more compelling explanation of our engagement and appreciation of fiction films. Okay, this was a fun paper. This periphery gives me something to think about. The idea that this is a different way to represent the third realm. Like I said, Frege, by definition, like had to come up with a concept to talk about the difference between where our thought is, where ideas come from, and like in the like sort of the mathematical realm. So it's like he had to come up with this. There is always, like I was saying earlier, in even contemporary discussions, fiction gets brought up in terms of logic. How do you represent different worlds and logic where the rules may be different than the real world, like different things are possible. And so this concept of a periphery where you have game rules, which they even said here, like a video game rules, that that's an interesting way of doing it. I actually just heard a talk recently where this sort of stuff would could apply. Yeah, so Radical, you want to get yourself into academia? Good luck, but I mean, work hard, get a chance at least. You want to actually do some like local politics, yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, it's not so easy to get into academia and do other stuff. It's just very difficult nowadays, but I mean, of course people do it. So yeah, okay. Yeah, so Fact Fiction Narration Conference. So there was a whole conference on this. Yeah. But like, yeah, this is a big topic in general. Like, how do we understand fictional narratives? Because it has a wider reach than just, literature, film, and aesthetics. So, yeah. Do we have anything else to say? Like, any questions about this? It's just interesting. Like, are you just imagining this stuff, like when you're talking about fiction, or is there something else going on? I think the author here, I mostly felt like I was in agreement. I mean, granted, it's not my area, so I'm just sort of, taking on what they're saying. But the idea that like there's control in how you're seeing what is going on in a fiction matters. It's not just that there is a fictional world; it's that there's a control to there's an access level control to what you're accessing in that fictional world, and that can be both part of your access and part of the aesthetic appreciation, as they were saying towards the end of the paper, like how that access is being manipulated. And so like that's interesting. So yeah, that's like the meta level of appreciation of a movie, is the cinematography, which you can appreciate as like well done, even as separate from like the content of the movie. I don't know how separable it is, but like it does seem that there is a form and content, as the author was saying, that you could accomplish certain things in, you know, multiple ways, and so the decisions on how that it gets done, of course, matter aesthetically. Okay. Yeah, so thank everyone for being here.